Why I love this amp so much is it reminds me a lot of those amps from the golden age of hi-fi, the late 70s, right? The mid-late 70s, when integrated amplifiers were built like tanks. They looked beautiful. They had the VU meters. They had all the inputs and outputs we wanted. And the HIFi Rose RA280 takes me back to that time. Integrated amp I want to talk to you about today is somehow flying under the radar. It's not getting much attention. It's been out for quite a while. I've tried to get a review unit a few times from several sources. I wasn't able to get one up until now because John over at Lone Crow Audio in California said, hey, I'll send you one if you want to review it. John's a HIFi Rose dealer. He also sells Daniel Hertz, all kinds of tannoy, all kinds of high-end products. But he said, I'll send you this new HIFi Rose integrated amp if you want to review it. So I said, sure thing. I've been listening to it, and I don't know why it's flown under the radar. It's at a fantastic price point because a lot of these high-end integrated amps are coming in these days at 7, 8, 9, 10,000 and up. This is under 3K, just under 3K. But it offers a lot of that flagship HIFi Rose RA280. Now, I reviewed the RA280 when it came out a while back. It feels like it's been a couple of years, and I really liked it, but I didn't fall in love with it because it just had too much for my needs. It had bi-amp capability, 200 watts per channel. You could bi-amp it into 400 watts, built in a phono stage with moving magnet, moving coil. It had some kind of EQ, it had tone controls. It was loaded and it had that steampunked design, which is kind of like a steampunked Nagra, right? That's what a lot of people talked about. So that RA280, it was either a I love the looks of it or I don't love the looks of it. You either loved it or you hated the looks. I like the looks. I thought it was cool because I like unique and different. But I didn't buy that integrated amplifier because it just had too much for my needs. But it had a sound to it that was detailed yet very smooth, powerful and effortless sounding due to that extreme power on tap. So today I want to talk about the HIFi Rose RA280, which comes at half the price, less than half the price of the RA280. It's a sleeker, stripped down version of that amp. And this one has everything I want in it and nothing I do not. So was the quality stripped down as well when it comes to sound or build? Absolutely not. The RA280 is just slimmer. It's not as tall as the RA180. It has a dual mono amp configuration that puts out 250 watts per channel, whether you're running 8 ohm speakers or 4 ohm speakers. Yes, this uses class D, but it is a GAN amp, which I've talked about before. The best amps I've ever heard in life were GAN amps, but they were $10,000, $11,000 for a set of monoblocks. This uses GAN technology, but it's using HIFi Rose's GAN technology, which they call Class AD. Now, HIFi Rose claims it has the effortless power. Their amps like this RA280 has that effortless power and drive and dynamic, effortless ease, but they claim that it also sounds a lot like a Class A amplifier. So imagine having a Class A amplifier that puts out 250 watts per channel. The thing would weigh 200 pounds. It would probably serve as a heater for your room in the wintertime and be unusable in the summer. Does it really sound like Class A? The good thing is I have a Class A amp here too, the Galleon A20, and I was comparing them side by side, and there's some similarities, but there's also some differences. Now, as far as the sound quality of the RA280, it sounds pretty much as I remember the RA180 sounding. This is a very smooth, dynamic, hard-hitting amp, but the treble is a little bit rolled off, so it's a warmer amp than what I've had in here recently. It's a much warmer amp than, say, the AGD Duets, right, which are $11,000 Class D GAN monoblocks. It is warmer than any Luxman I've had in here. It's about on par with the warmth of the Yamaha AS3200. Now, just because I'm saying it's warm doesn't mean it doesn't have detail. There is detail here. It's just not thrown in your face like with some of these more analytical amplifiers. As a matter of fact, the HIFi Rose RA280 is a perfect match to speakers that are a little bright in the top end. So say you have a speaker, it's a little bright or harsh to your ears, right? Maybe the bass isn't as plentiful as you like. This amp right here, the RA280, would be a miracle worker for those speakers because it will smooth out that treble and it will pump up the bass. Now, the RA280 has tremendous bass quality. It's big. It has bigger bass than my AGD duets, right? And those are $11,000 amps. It has bigger bass than just about any integrated I've had in here. But the bass is also pretty tight. It's not the tightest, cleanest bass, but it's very, very tight. Why I love this amp so much is it reminds me a lot of those amps from the golden age of hi-fi, the late 70s, right? The mid-late 70s, when integrated amplifiers were built like tanks. They looked beautiful. They had the VU meters. They had all the inputs and outputs we wanted. And the HIFi Rose RA280 takes me back to that time because it's a simple integrated amp. Yes, it has a phono stage for moving magnet. It doesn't have a DAC. It doesn't have a streamer. It has a bass and treble tone control, which you can defeat with a lever, a switch. It also has 2 VU meters that you can have on bright, medium, or I believe you can just turn them all the way off if you want to listen in the dark. The HIFi Rose has a big fat volume dial on the right side, and on the left, it takes that input selector from the flagship RA280, and it's very solid feeling, very clicks into place where you pick your inputs. It also ships with a remote. The remote has volume up and down, power off, and mute. It does not let you, and I think HIFi Rose missed the boat here, it doesn't let you switch inputs, right, on the remote. So I think they, at the less than half price of their flagship, they also kind of dumbed down the remote. For me, it's not a big deal because I mostly listen to streaming. I've listened to this with both the HIFi Rose RS130 streamer, which I've declared my favorite streamer of all time up until this point. And I've been listening to it a lot more with the new Auralic S1 streamer and DAC with its dedicated power supply. I found that to be a fantastic match. The Auralic S1 has a custom tweaked DAC that Auralic implemented here, and it's kind of a mix of R2R and Delta Sigma kind of performance, but it's stunning in its clarity and its openness, and it mates really, really well to the HIFi Rose RA280. Now, what are the features of this amp before we get into the speakers I listened to this amp with? It has, like I said, the tone controls, and they're very well done. Now, Yamaha on their integrated amps does the tone control thing very, very well. Much better than 95% of integrated amps out there that implement a tone control. This, though, I think is my favorite. I love the way HIFi Rose implemented the tone controls in the RA280, and they put them here again. Bass and treble, very simple, but when you turn up the bass or treble, it's not adding, say, boom when you turn up the bass. It's adding texture and richness and a little bit deeper bass. You don't get the boominess or sloppiness of some tone controls, and it's not darkening the sound at all. It's just putting that lower bass out a little bit more. Same with the treble. I can turn the treble up, and it's not going to give me ear-piercing hard treble like a lot of tone controls do. So you have those tone controls. You have a built-in moving magnet phono stage, which sounds way, way better than I thought it ever would. Now, I hooked up my U-Turn Orbit 2, the latest generation, and I bypassed its internal phono stage. This is a kind of a starter turntable for those serious about analog. I love it. It just works, and it sounded fantastic with its Ortophon Blue cartridge right into the HIFi Rose RA280. The phono stage is really, really good here, guys. So you have those VU meters, you can defeat them, you can defeat the tone controls, take it out of the circuit. What about noise? The amp makes no noise whatsoever from the box. With highly sensitive speakers, you might hear a little bit of fuzz coming from the treble if you get close and put your ear up, but that's normal for most amplifiers, especially in this price range. So the features are everything I need, maybe everything you need, and there's nothing here that I don't need. On the back, there's a subwoofer output, so you can easily hook up a subwoofer. I've been listening to it with the brand new Bucard Sub 1, which has been the easiest sub I've ever had in here to implement into the system. It just implements so easy, and it's also tunable. I'll go into that when I review that sub very, very soon. The HIFi Rose 280 also has 3 RCA inputs and 1 balanced XLR input in addition to that phono input. So with all that out of the way, let's talk about the sound. So I first started with my Qualio IQ Ultras, and I was listening to them with the AGD Duets and the AGD Alto, almost a $20,000 combination. And with this setup, they are stunning, open, uber detailed, uber 3D, all of that. But I remember in my review of the IQs, I said the mid bass was a little more bare, right? And that's not really from the speaker, that's from the amps. That's the way the AGDs are tuned or they sound. They don't puff up the mid range. When I hooked up the HIFi Rose 280 to the Qualio IQ Ultras, that mid range fleshed out, and these speakers all of a sudden became a little bit warm. The treble was a little bit rolled off, but I still heard the cymbal shimmers coming through and floating in space a little bit, not to the extent of these Uber amps, but this gave just enough of that performance to make me say, wow, I can't believe this is a $3,000 integrated amplifier. And I was running it with a $3,000 DAC and streamer, so $6,000 total. And it was powering these IQ Ultras with a beauty, with a warmth, with a heart-touching, soulful kind of sound. And they had that before with the other amps, but they were just more electric with those amps and a little leaner in the mids. With the Rose, it's giving you that experience where I sit in the room, I dim the lights, I can have a drink in hand and just soak it all in. And I was very, very impressed with the performance with the IQ Ultras. It really made them sound like a different speaker. Not a different speaker, just not as in your face with the treble. So it really tamed down the treble and it fleshed out the mids a little bit, but it's still, these speakers are still extremely holographic. Favorite speakers of all time, the Qualio IQ Ultras. I just can't get enough. I took them out, I put in some other speakers, and I was like, where'd that detail go? I don't hear it with these. So the IQ Ultras and the HIFi Rose sound really, really good, but those Ultras will sound a little, they'll take on the character of the amp you hook up to it, right? That's what's so great about these speakers. So next I hooked up the little Galleon Voyager Mark II SCs, which I believe are sold out now over at Thomas's Galleon website. I love these little speakers for that warm vocal region. These are speakers I like to listen to jazz, vocal jazz on, because the vocals are just so present and palpable and real. And it doesn't have the extreme detail of the IQ Ultras, but the treble in those little speakers is quite fine and detailed. Under $1,000 speakers, and it's as if the HIFi Rose was powering them with an effortless ease. And these things take some power. They're not the easiest to drive. But the HIFi Rose RA280 drove those speakers beautifully in this room. It made them sound really, really large. And I was like, after a couple days, you know, we get used to the sound we're hearing of different pieces. I was like, these might sound just as big as the Borison X2s. So I took them out and I put the Borison X2s in. And this amp, I feel with the Borisons might be a little too warm. The Borisons, in this space anyway, since I've gotten them, for me, they've been warm-leaning, punchy, powerful, rich speakers. And with the RA280, I think they were just a little bit too warm. The treble was a little too muted. So the RA280, you don't want to pair it with overly warm or warm-leaning speakers. You want to pair it with neutral to tipped-up speakers, and then it will tame that tipped-up nature of those speakers, but it will make neutral speakers sound alive, beautiful, and holographic, right? It was doing that with the Qualio IQ Ultras. It was a nice, warm, rich mid-range with the Galleons. With the X2s, I thought there was a little bit too much warmth from the RA280. Now, it still sounded absolutely beautiful, don't get me wrong, and I could live with that sound, but I just wanted a little more excitement in the treble. I then threw in the Augies and Bobs from Closer Acoustics, and those speakers were beautiful with this amplifier. Those are a little tipped up, the Augies and the treble, and this amp tamed them and made them appear big, fluid, fuller, and it was just an all-out beautiful sound. I gotta say, I actually preferred the RA280 with the Augie and Bobs versus some much more pricey amplification. So with all of the speakers I tested with this amp, it performed really, really well. And it showed me one thing, that again, this is a warm leaning amp. It's a rich sounding amp, yet it still retains the details, the dynamics, but it's smooth and refined. So all in all, this is what I feel is a bargain. And I'll be honest, I know companies don't like me to say things like this, but I prefer this one to the RA180, but it depends on what your needs are. If you want to bi-amp a speaker, right, and have massive power, 400 watts per channel, the RA180 is going to do that for you. If you like that steampunked Nagra-esque design, the RA180 has more of that. The 280 is a stripped down looking version of the 180, and I think it looks beautiful. I have it here in black, as you see. Normally, I keep the tone controls off. I'm a purist kind of guy, but I've been using the tone controls here because they don't degrade the sound. They don't degrade the sound stage. They don't mess up anything. So when I had those Borison X2s, when it was leaning warm, here's the good part. I flicked on the tone controls. I turned up the treble, a little bit, and maybe to, I'd say 2 o'clock. And that was about the perfect amount of treble energy coming through. The speakers all of a sudden became more airy. So these tone controls on the RA280 are fantastic. I'm tired of amps, and I've been tired of amps for a long time, that sound like, you turn them on and you're like, where's the beef? Where's the bass? Why is that treble assaulting my brain? Those are the kind of amps, if they come in here, I send them back and say, I can't review it because I wouldn't buy it myself. No offense. It's just not something that I find pleasurable or musical. All right, so let's talk a little bit about this Class AD thing. Now, HIFi Rose says this amp gives you the benefits of Class D without the negatives of the old Class D. So power, dynamics, that effortless ease, smooth sound. And they also say it brings some Class A characteristics, like the detail Class A can pull out, and that glow of Class A. Does it stand up to that claim? I pulled out my Galleon A20 power amp here, which is a pure Class A 20 watt per channel amp. It's probably my favorite, if not one of the top 3 favorite Class A amps I've ever had here or in my lifetime. It's a passion project for Thomas, built with all high quality parts, beautiful enclosure, and 20 watts of pure Class A. I hooked that up after listening to the Rose 280 for a few days, and there was a pretty big difference. The Galleon was more open, more clear, had more sparkle up top, was more holographic, had more depth, and that was using the Orlik S1 streamer with power supply as a preamp and DAC directly into the Galleon. Hooking up the Qualios brought back more of that, even more of the holographic nature, and the mid-range was about half as fleshed out as the Rose, but they sounded beautiful, crystalline, open audiophile. The HIFi Rose is $29.95 for a full integrated amp with a preamp, amp, dual mono amp, and you get the phono stage for under $3,000. The Galleon is a power amp only that you'll need a preamp for, etc., and that comes in at just under $4,000, but it is a beautiful amplifier. The RA280, to me, represents a bargain in the integrated amp world as of 2024. There's a lot of integrated amplifiers out there. I've heard a ton of them. I've heard them in all price ranges. This one is no better or no worse than any of those. They're just different. There's just differences in audio. And when you get to this level of quality, which I would call, looking at the build, the parts, quality, the design, and the sound, I call this a high-end integrated amplifier. It's rare to get a high-end integrated amplifier at under $3,000. If all you need are some RCA inputs, a balanced input, a phono input, and powerful power, 250 watts per channel, this is an amp you should look at, especially if you like a warm, richer, smoother, refined sound, right? Maybe not so much treble shouting at your face, but a smoother treble that's still open and holographic. This is a beautiful amplifier. If you pair it to neutral speakers or speakers that are a little bright, it will tame that brightness and really make them come into their own. So all in all, I really enjoyed the RA280. I'm going to keep it here for a while. If you are looking for one, I can highly recommend John at Lone Crow Audio. Now, I've worked with John over the last year. He sent me some Daniel Hertz stuff. I purchased stuff from him, and he's been top-notch all the way. Very cool guy, very nice guy. And he has these HIFi Roses. He carries them. So since he sent me the review unit, I want to give him a nice plug because A, he runs a great shop, B, he's a great guy, and he carries this amp and the entire line of HIFi Rose. He told me there's a DAC coming out in the fall he'll send me as soon as he gets it for review. I can't wait to check that out, a new DAC from HIFi Rose. Thanks, guys. I love you all. I'll see you in the next one.